Hello, listeners. This is Comics Revolt audio review number 2, and today I'm going to be reviewing Frank Miller and Jim Lee's All-Star Batman, Robin the Boy Wonder. Now, before I go into depth about this series, I think it's worthwhile to note Frank Miller's previous work on Batman and his work on Sin City. In Batman: The Dark Knight Returns and in Batman Year One, Frank Miller gave us a very, how do you describe it? A very dark and disturbed Batman. He was very focused on his mission. He was very violent and uh, he didn't give anybody a chance, basically. They were masterpieces in their own right. They really pushed comics further in the direction of where they were today, a la Watchmen and Grant Morrison's works and all that. But All-Star Batman and Robin has more to do with Dark Knight Strikes Again. Don't be worried about this. I initially was because critical reviews were very harsh. They said Frank Miller's lost all taste in his writing, and whilst some may think that of All-Star Batman, I think there's a lot of things that people missed with this series. I would like to note that the first volume, which is what I'm reviewing, only 9 issues were published, and it's definitely not a complete story. It's waiting to be completed in a series that, because it had so many delays, it took 4 years to publish 9 issues, which is ridiculous. But it got really delayed, and so they're restarting the series as Dark Knight Boy Wonder to finish the story. Now, for the, I don't know how long it is, 150 to 200 pages that you get in All-Star Batman and Robin, not an awful lot actually happens. The plot is very thin, and it's more like a series of vignettes almost. You've got all these multiple stories going on at the same time, but they don't really affect each other, with the main story obviously being Batman kidnapping a young Dick Grayson and training him to be Robin. Now, I must say that I really enjoyed All-Star Batman and Robin. It was completely unexpected, the style that Frank Miller gave it. It has more in line with something like Kick-Ass than it does with Batman Year One. We have a very comedic take on Batman here, and don't get worried about that, because I'm not saying comedic in the sense of Adam West and Burt Ward. I'm saying comedic in the sense of Kick-Ass and everything that Mark Miller has ever done. This is Frank Miller on crack writing Batman. It's great. Batman's laughing all the time. He kills people. He is generally not a very nice guy, and he's not particularly a version of Batman that somebody would want to hang out with. I mean, Year One and Dark Knight Returns, they were pretty much the same Batman. This Batman that we're seeing here, although Frank Miller has stated that it happens in the Dark Knight universe, is completely different from those two characters. He's almost a new character in himself. But Frank Miller really does take the opportunity to do a lot of stuff that has never been done with Batman before. And I'm just flipping through the book right now, and we see the Justice League, which we did see in Dark Knight Returns, Dark Knight Strikes Again. But here we have a much of a smaller focus on them than we did in Dark Knight Strikes Again. In Strikes Again, it was pretty much the Justice League were the hero of the story, whilst Batman was more of a villain, with Jason Todd being a villain at one point. And Strikes Again was very much an ensemble cast, where Superman and Green Lantern, it was equally as much their book as it was Batman's. But this book is pretty much told exclusively from the point of view of Batman and Robin. There are small detours here and then where we learn about the Black Canary and Batgirl. I won't go too much into those because they're pretty unique takes on the characters that haven't been done before. But the entire story is pretty much told from the point of view of Batman and Robin. Frank Miller really has done something new with this series. I haven't really seen anything like this before. Batman's completely psychotic, but he's also brought a new dimension to the character, which has never really been seen before, and that is he's given Batman some sexual preference towards women. Batman is much more likable because of this, because it makes him more easy to connect with. On the other hand, Frank Miller's made Batman completely psychotic and insane, and this makes him almost inhuman. Going on from that, Frank Miller, he's stylized the book incredibly. The portrayal of women in this is very sexualized. I didn't particularly like it, and I don't think it adds much to the story. And in fact, at some points, it's a bit ridiculous, especially with the Black Canary. Um, and this Frank Miller has done this a lot, particularly in Sin City, where almost all the characters are prostitutes. This worked well in Sin City because Sin City was a dark, grimy city, and it had room for that there. But All-Star Batman, whilst it does make the point of um, focusing on sexuality and insanity, it has a place here, but Batman's never really been a character where we've seen sexualized women before like this. I mean, Black Canary, she's pretty much portrayed as a stripper, although she isn't technically one. I wouldn't. I think it's kind of becoming for her, and it's ridiculous. She's wearing high heels all the time. Um, Now, some people are going to say I'm conservative in saying this, but I mean, come on, think about it. There's panels where she's running everywhere, kicking guys in the face and breaking arms. How are you going to be able to do that if you're running around in high heels? Um, on the other hand, I think that when people read this comic, they should not expect a complete story, because it ends with something of a cliffhanger. I won't tell you what it is, but Batman suddenly possesses a lot of power that isn't necessarily a good thing. Um, I really liked the comedy of this story because it's not something that is focused too much on Batman. It's kind of refreshing nowadays. I mean, sure, in the 60s and 50s, Batman was a bit light-hearted. This Batman has more and more of that lightheartedness and comedy than it does with nowadays. It doesn't really have any place in the DC continuity. I know it's not in the DC continuity, but also Frank Miller has stated that takes place in the Dark Knight continuity. But I do think that Frank Miller should have done a little bit of research on his own works, because whilst he does make references to them, such as Joker poisoning the Gotham Harbor and all these events that happens in Dark Knight Returns, like for example we see the Batmobile from Dark Knight Returns at one point, Frank Miller does make some blatant errors in the continuity. So for example, at one point in the story, uh, Dick Grayson has been kidnapped by Batman and he's sitting in the Batmobile, and he says to Batman, what do you call this car? And Batman says, I call it the Batmobile. If you read Dark Knight Returns, when he first gets into the Batmobile in that version, which is more like a tank, he actually says that Jason Todd named the car the Batmobile. Of course, this is a bit nitpicky and very, very focused on. I'm sure only fans of real hardcore fans like me of the comic would um, notice it, but it's still a bit of an error because you can't really call it as being in the same continuity now that they've made this mistake. Um, a lot of DC Comics characters do feature quite heavily in this. Um, Superman and Wonder Woman make minor appearances, and Green Lantern makes appearances at a somewhat more important position. It's interesting to see Frank Miller's take on these characters. Um, Superman here, at this point, he's only really starting his career as a crime fighter. Um, in Strikes Again and in Returns, we see him as very focused and very inhuman in his dedication to fighting crime. Here we see a very inexperienced Superman that hasn't even learned how to fly yet. Um, Additionally, we see Wonder Woman as she has just come from the Amazons, and she is very, very feminist. She sees all the females in our society as weak and inexperienced, and that the males control everything. And she is heavily critical of society, of our society, because of this. This was very interesting to read because I'm not a Wonder Woman fan. I haven't read many, but this was the first time that I'd seen Wonder Woman portrayed in such a way. Green Lantern is also portrayed quite hilariously because Batman sees him, at one point he says he's got the goddamn imagination of a potato. Um, Batman's incredibly harsh on Hal Jordan in this, and Hal Jordan is made a fool of, but somewhat by both Batman and Robin. I really like this because it's somewhat of an inside joke between Frank Miller and the reader. Um, I'd also like to take just a brief moment to note just how beautiful Jim Lee's artwork is. I mean, he really is turning in some brilliant artwork on this series. I mean, if anybody out there has read Batman Hush, then they'll certainly know what to expect from Jim Lee. But here I mean, Frank Miller's script was insane enough, but Jim Lee adds a whole new level of insanity to the character of Batman just through his artwork. I mean, Batman's smiling. I mean, the expressions on his faces are just funny. Um, Jim Lee really is turning in some career-defining artwork here. And also, whilst Batman and Robin pretty much have exactly the same costumes as they did in mainstream versions, it's interesting to see how he's uh, slightly changed the costumes of some of the more prominent some more prominent characters of the DC universe, and really made them his own. So Jim Lee definitely has done a really good job here. I'm not really going to say any more on All-Star Batman and Robin, but go in expecting satire and action and complete insane, and it's got so much energy that Batman hasn't had for such a long time. And I really do think it's very original, and I do hope that Frank Miller and Jim Lee eventually get around to starting Dark Knight Boy Wonder, because I'm definitely going to subscribe to the comic. And I think that whilst the majority of the audience that the comic was intended for might not enjoy it, I do think it's definitely worth the read. On Amazon you can order a paperback for about $13. It's definitely worth the read. I'd go out now and buy it. So enjoy.